Hello, I'm Max, and this video is to respond to teachers who have asked me what they could do to improve their teaching. Before beginning, here are a few words about this video series, Under the Magnifying Glass. Welcome to Under the Magnifying Glass. This is a video series presenting different video articles to help teachers in their work. They are partially inspired by teachers and schools who have approached me to get some views on those themes. Perhaps one or more of the talks will be of interest to you. So, we're going to look at how one might approach one's own teaching with the intention of identifying specific areas to work on. Teachers interested in self-development. This talk is for teachers looking for ways to improve their teaching. This includes teachers just starting and teachers with several, even many years of teaching experience. It includes teachers whose native language is English and teachers who have learned or are in the process of learning better the English language. And most, if not all, the ideas can be applied to teachers of other languages as well. We'll look at self-development in 5 sections. Part A is a listing of some areas that you can go through, perhaps helping you identify a specific one to focus on. In Part B, we'll look at what you can do once you've identified that area to work on. A concrete example is provided to give some clarity on how you might approach that. Part C has some further suggestions on how you might go about improving your teaching. Part D looks at how you might strengthen your English language. This applies to both native and non-native English teachers, and some of the ideas might be useful for you if you have some private classes. Part E ends the talk with a few final words, including some suggestions on what might be considered as a good teacher. Sometimes teachers don't know where to begin. For myself, I sometimes feel this can be overwhelming, as there's so much to potentially work on, even for seasoned teachers. For those with lesser experience, it can be even more intimidating. My advice is to identify a few areas you want to work on, and narrow down your list to just 1 or 2. You can't do everything at once. When you feel you've made progress in that area, then begin thinking of a new one. You can, of course, work on more than one area at a time. But the idea here is not to spread yourself out too thinly and to focus on making headway more profoundly in one area so you can appreciate the results. In the previous video in this series, we looked at evaluating teachers in observations. An important part of this video was looking at what criteria to evaluate. In other words, what skills does the teacher have that are well developed, and which could use some improvement? Those criteria serving for evaluation can also be used as a reference to what areas could be worked on. I'll list the criteria talked about in that video here for your convenience, but I recommend looking at that video for some more details and suggestions. This listing is provided to help you have a reference of possibilities to consider if it isn't already clear to you where to begin. Just pause the video to have more time to read the list. Consider that list of criteria I've just shown you to help you complete Step 2. Once that is done, we can go to Part B, which will help you get started towards making improvements in that area. Part B. Sometimes people are a little lost and would appreciate a little direction or some suggestions. In Part B, I'm going to give you some ideas on how you can approach working on a specific area once you have identified it. Imagine you have decided that specific area to be exploring is how you might improve your board work, which of course includes the showing of a screen to your students, be it teaching online or presential. Now that you have identified the area to focus on, Consider as many different aspects related to it as you can. These are aspects that you want to evaluate how you approach them, and maybe find ways to improve that approach. You can brainstorm as many aspects as you can that are related to that area of focus. You can start a list and add to it as more ideas come to you. You can search on the internet, talk with your friends and colleagues. In this example, we have been making a list for board work. There is the size and color of the writing to consider. This could be on a blackboard with different kinds of chalk, a whiteboard with different board pens, or a virtual screen, and you can choose from a selection of different tools. We have more considerations. There is the legibility of your writing. There is the size and limits of the board or screen. Consider who your students are. Are they senior citizens who may have difficulties reading fine print? If it's on a screen, will the students be able to read it easily or have access to zooming in on some details? If you are physically present in a big class, will the students on the sides of the room or at the back be able to see everything? What about the use of images, which include drawings, projections, charts, posters, photographs? How are you going to approach highlighting or the presentation of information? Will you use titles or graphics? Will you underline some points? What are your sources of input for when you write or have things on the board? Will it come from yourself, your students, the student's book, or other sources? Maybe you normally depend solely on yourself, and now you want to include more student input, and they can see what they have contributed on the board or screen. Concerning the organization, if you typically reserve different parts of the board or screen for specific purposes, the students will become accustomed to referring to those locations when they need to. I used to write in the top left corner a brief summary about what we will be doing in today's class, just a few keywords. I also included the homework I would be assigning. Students who come late or have to leave early can especially take advantage of that, and many appreciate knowing what we will be covering that day. They like feeling the structure and directions and being informed. Organizing your board work in familiar ways to the students contributes to that. You might want to think about how frequently you use the board, and when or in what situations. Do you give yourself some extra space for unexpected points or further development that might come up in the class? What is it you want from your students when they see that board work? Do you want them to copy that information or photograph it on their smartphones? Maybe what they see is to help them pay attention or focus in on something, or to remember something. Perhaps they need those references a little later in the class to be used as prompts or guides or for some other purpose. So, those examples of the first point we just looked at can show you what a list of related aspects to work on could look like. Of course, you can format it and add details and notes in the ways that suit you. Once you have a good list to refer to, go through those aspects and make notes on how much and how well you approach each of them. Focus in on just a few of those factors that you want to work on, and make a plan. Make a plan on how you can make changes to how to approach them. For example, maybe you want to clarify where you want to direct your students' attention, and one way you can do that is by using titles for each new area of focus. Or maybe you want to divide up your board or screen into different sections so the students would become familiar with looking at that location when they need to reference it. Put those plans deliberately into your lesson planning and be clear on how you're going to go about addressing those aspects. That includes thinking of how you might access seeing if those changes were effective. How would you know if there were positive changes? Maybe plan on trying it a few times in different classes to get a better feel for it or to try out different ways. Perhaps you could plan to ask the students to give you feedback. If you like to approximate the research approach, you could consider the use of control groups. In other words, with one or more classes or groups of students, you could introduce those changes, and with one or more other classes, you don't. After experimenting in the number of classes that you decide is appropriate, you could compare the results. You may prefer to keep it simple and have just a subjective assessment. You could see if you feel any better doing it in that new way. Once it's well planned out, execute those plans in several classes, maybe with different groups, and see how it works. Be open to experimenting and playing with it a little, and to the notion that you might have to think about investigating it further before making any final decisions. See how the students react to your changes. Make notes, and reflect on it some more after the class is done. It's very likely that you will need to continue to play with some of those aspects until you feel that you are much more on top of them. After you have explored a few aspects and how they might be improved, you may want to focus in on a few other aspects of your board work, referring to that previous list you made. Or perhaps you are inspired to explore another theme altogether. Part C suggests more ways that one can explore how to improve their teaching. I spent some time explaining how you may want to go about choosing and exploring one area on your own. There are other ways, not unrelated, that you can explore how to improve your teaching. You can ask other teachers how they approach those factors. Sometimes just a few words will inspire you to try something new out. And sometimes you need a longer conversation to better understand what's involved. Observe other teachers about some aspect in mind that's important for you to explore. Chat with those teachers, letting them know what you're interested in and that you'd like to see how they deal with it. Chat again with those teachers after the observation to solidify or explore further some things you might want to try in your classes or are curious about. Check out other sources for more perspectives and ideas. You can read articles or books. Check out the internet, forums and blogs. Take courses, enroll in workshops, ask your coordinator or your director of studies. Keep a journal and make notes on your hopes, plans, and investigations. Attempting to put those things into words can help you immensely in defining more clearly what you want to achieve and how to go about it. Be patient and determined. Some areas you wish to improve could take years. Those years will pass by anyway, but with directed efforts and an open mind, you will see progress. Remember your students. They are an incredible source which can provide you with direction and feedback in your explorations. How they react to your plans can provide key insights on how to further fine-tune your approach. Sometimes they can offer you suggestions from their perspectives on how you might go about helping them learn. And, of course, they are much of the reason why you want to be a better teacher. Improving yourself as a teacher can also include becoming better acquainted with the language you are teaching. In these examples, it's English, but the ideas can be equally relevant to other languages. In my experience, a good teacher is a good teacher, and whether you are a native teacher or a non-native teacher, the students appreciate solid classes, good direction and support, and opportunities for them to practice and explore so their expertise and confidence can grow. Both natives and non-natives can be good teachers, and in the bigger picture, it makes little difference whether you are native or not. However, they are not exactly the same, especially not at first. Over time, though, those differences play a much smaller role, if any. I'm basing this partly on my experiences over the last 35 years when interacting with students commenting on teachers they have had. I'm also basing this on my interactions while in an administrative role in different schools and on conversing with other teacher trainers and seeing firsthand for myself how people entering a 4-week teaching certification course are and react to the demands placed upon them during that course. Whatever group you are in, if you are a language teacher, there are often some advantages and disadvantages associated with being in that group. Let's start with the native English teachers, shall we? Remember that this is what can often be seen, generally speaking. And of course, there are many individual differences and exceptions. And also, of course, it bears repeating that over time and seasoned experiences, the disadvantages usually begin to reduce. Starting with the advantages, native English speakers beginning their career as English teachers can appreciate a number of advantages. They have been using English all their life, and it comes naturally to them. They have seen it used in many different situations, some firsthand and otherwise, such as in novels and movies, seeing other people using it. They can appreciate more subtle differences, such as regional differences or somebody being ironic or telling a joke. This means that their abilities in listening, in speaking, in reading comprehension, in writing are reasonably good, or even strong if they have studied at higher levels or worked in environments that demanded good skills. Native speakers do have a number of disadvantages when starting out as a teacher or taking a course which enables them to become a teacher. This is especially true when you compare them to non-natives in the same course, where those non-natives have achieved a high enough level to be able to teach the language. There are some exceptions to this, as there are a number of native English polyglots, for example, who have learned languages other than English. Generally speaking, though, many English speakers don't know very much about their own language, grammar-wise. A big part of the population of English speakers learn their language with very little understanding of how it is constructed or how it works. Most English teachers I know, myself included, had to learn the grammar of their own language almost from scratch in order to be able to reasonably present grammar in the classes or respond to students' questions and challenges. In my first years of teaching, I had to spend many hours every week just getting acquainted with the terminology and what it referred to. I had no clue what a verb tense or auxiliary really was, or how a sentence or question is constructed. It wasn't just that a great investment of time and effort was necessary. It also influenced the confidence I had in myself as a teacher, and how the students saw me and interacted in the classes. I wasn't able to address their difficulties in grammar well, because I wasn't clear on what they actually were. The same could be said for pronunciation or how vocabulary and word construction works. I also never really learned another language before I was a teacher. There were some superficial situations when I was a teenager where the teacher tried to interest us in learning French, but I wasn't a good student and never really applied myself. Because I hadn't gone through the experience of learning another language reasonably well, I couldn't appreciate what my students might be struggling with. That included my giving of explanations, deciding on what activities to give the students, and even instructing them on how to go about those activities. I had to learn the hard way how to project my voice, enunciate well, and speak more slowly for lower levels, to be very selective in choosing my words and how much to say. I just blindly assumed that those explanations I would give would clear up all the problems. These are just a few of the challenges new teachers encounter, but native speakers of English might have to work a little harder than non-natives to become more effective in the classroom, and even in their lesson planning, at least concerning understanding or referring to grammar or dealing with pronunciation and word formation. Now I'd like to talk about the advantages and disadvantages non-native teachers have. Again, this is just generally speaking, and more relevant at the beginning of their career. One can't easily put all cultures and non-English languages into one group, but to keep things simple and to make a few points, I will. Again, there are so many individual differences that some of these points won't be applicable to all non-native English teachers. Also, over time, the disadvantages will reduce or disappear, just like those for native English teachers. Beginning with the advantages. Non-native teachers often come from a country which insists on their children and teens learning their language well, including, and perhaps especially, the grammar. So they grow up while learning that grammar is important and how it works. When they start learning English, they are already aware of some of the grammatical concepts associated with their own language, and they can see how those concepts are applied to English. This gives them an enormous advantage when thinking of how to present the language to their students when they become teachers themselves. It is not only the presentation, but because they know what it is like to be language learners, being one themselves. So they can appreciate what might be needed in activities for students to practice those concepts. Anyone new to teaching is facing a plethora of challenges, and it doesn't matter if they are native or non-native. But on these points, many non-natives will have an advantage over the natives. Many non-natives will also have some disadvantages. Again, there's much individual difference at play. For example, a non-native may be an avid English reader and have a much greater vocabulary range than most natives. However, if we consider the average person in average circumstances, many non-natives have a smaller lexical repertoire than the natives. Synonyms are often similar to other synonyms in some ways, but those subtle nuances in different meanings and applications might be challenging for non-natives, at least until they have more experience with them. If they haven't had a lot of immersion in English culture, some jokes, idiomatic expressions, examples of irony, cultural references, they might be lost or misinterpreted by them. To be fair, native speakers might have similar problems when they come across English being used in other English regions foreign to their own. And the same could be said for understanding the accents and mannerisms of people from those places too. Still, while some English people find hearing the language with an exotic accent very special, those non-natives are sometimes concerned that their accent might interfere with how they would like to represent themselves, or how they would like to be treated. Some students feel they want a native speaker as their teacher, so they can learn that accent better, not to hear English spoken with a foreign accent. Again, life is more complicated than that. I was born Canadian, and when I was told to use American books for my classes, I had to learn to do the listenings and teach the grammar that might not always be similar to my native version. And when I was in other schools which used British books in their curriculum, I had to become familiar with those systems of pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. So there's no one true interpretation of a native speaker, and almost everyone accepts different accents these days, as long as they don't interfere too much with understanding or communication. Many non-native teachers appreciate that over time as they become more confident in their own teaching and in their understanding of the language they are teaching. Non-natives may feel insecure at first about their pronunciation and skills in English, but they usually become more confident as time goes on. So, generally speaking, there are some non-native and there are some native English teachers who experience different advantages and disadvantages than the other group. However, over time, as their familiarity with the language and being a teacher increases, both groups become more and more similar, focused on their career as teachers and on helping their students learn well. I'd like to continue this section of the talk with a few tips for each of the two groups, keeping in mind that what will be said may be not exclusive to just one group. Starting with native teachers. You have to learn your native language better, especially how it is constructed and how it works. Many non-natives understand your language better in those ways, because they have learned the concepts of grammar for their own language and can apply them when learning about and teaching English. Start with some basics like parts of speech. Buy a book or two which explains the English grammar, partly to understand it yourself and also to get acquainted with some of the vocabulary. Your students don't need to learn all the speech jargon, but it could help you as you organize your thoughts and also know better what to search for. Some teachers' books which accompany the course have some helpful explanations and suggestions. Some practice books too, especially when they explain a little of the theory or grammar on the left page and have the pertaining exercises on the right page. Think of how you want to present the language, balancing what you feel you can clearly help the students with and their learning needs. For example, if you haven't yet understood the language point well yourself, then perhaps give it a superficial explanation or presentation, and have the students simply use the structure in different situations which are appropriate for that usage. The students may even need this active practice more than a profound academic understanding of the structure. Many students learn through associating the grammar to the situation, rather than understanding a complex intellectual system. Experiment with different approaches and explanations. Maybe when you feel more confident with how the target language is constructed and when it should be used, you can get the students to provide those explanations for you, and you can guide them or steer them in directions that make it clearer to them. Don't shy away from the grammar in your lessons, but don't tackle the difficult and subtle nuances of the more challenging aspects until you feel you have a good understanding of the basics first. You can rely more on examples to get across the meaning and structure than the intellectual reasoning for it. Stay practical and not too theoretical in your classes. The theory helps you more in your planning and understanding. In the classroom, a little theory is good to provide some direction, but mostly get the students to practice the structures so they can become more familiar with using them and associating when it is more appropriate to do so. Monitor them and make notes to yourself to see where they might need further clarity or direction or practice. Ask other teachers what they do or tap into their understanding. Much of that has to come from your explorations, but other teachers can give you good ideas. And of course, as you become more experienced, you can share your hard-earned insights with others asking you. If you haven't already, take up learning a new language. In comparing it to English, you will better appreciate some similarities and differences, and this will open your mind to better understanding your own language. And of course, you can also better appreciate what it means to be a student, as well as perhaps watch your teacher in action and get some good ideas from her or him. These are some tips for non-native teachers who would like to strengthen their language skills in English or the language they are teaching. My first piece of advice is don't be shy because you are a teacher and may not be a master of the language you are teaching. If you are in a school that also employs some native teachers, you might feel intimidated by their apparent level of proficiency in using the language, or you might be embarrassed because there are many things you don't know as well as they do. Remember that most native speakers have many doubts themselves about their own language. Remember, too, that not knowing English to the level you would like to have doesn't reflect on your teaching abilities or the rapport you have created with your students. Also, I would like to point out that you should be admired for taking on these challenges. It's difficult enough to be a teacher, and to teach a language that is not the one you were born into is quite a feat. Be patient with yourself and maintain that determination to continue learning more about the language. Furthermore, your experiences in learning a new language will help you immeasurably when helping your students do the same. Reading. Reading is a good way of not only increasing your vocabulary, but also seeing the language in use. Choose topics that interest you. If you like romantic mysteries or sports or manga, then seek out books or articles that deal with those themes. Newspapers and magazines are good too, because they often have different sections, and you might be curious about what another area might have to offer, including the style of English they use to present it. There are instruction manuals and do-it-yourself or self-improvement books, lots of resources. If you choose an English novel, maybe select one that you have already read in your language, so you can understand what is developing better. Or choose one that is graded, one that is appropriate for your level. Don't worry about understanding every word or grammatical usage. But on special occasions, when you feel a word is very important to learn or understand, and especially so if you believe it to be very useful and that you could use it many times in your spoken or written English later on, then make a special exception to take a moment to break out of the story and check out the meaning. Otherwise, accept that there are some parts of what you are reading that will escape you, and that's okay. Enjoy the story without understanding everything. If you spend too much time looking up all the unknown words that you will forget anyway, you will lose interest in continuing the story. Don't make reading all work or give yourself expectations and tasks that are too demanding or unrealistic. Keep reading interesting to you, and it will be helpful to you, not a burden. Writing. Writing is an excellent way of toning up your language. You don't have the pressures of time and expectations like you do when you are speaking. And there are many ways you can approach it. You could keep a diary or journal, for example, and jot down a few thoughts. Much of the language you will need in your writing will be directly relevant, and any areas that are unclear to you will appear. This is a great way to see and strengthen what you know, and to identify where you could improve. As much as possible, don't try to do the writing in your maternal language first, and then attempt to translate it. It is much better to try to think in English, even in a limited way, for many reasons. One important reason is that the direct translation can be very complicated, and sometimes not exactly possible. So that can place you into situations that are very time-consuming and discouraging. You also want to get a feel for how the language works. So use what you know, and try communicating your ideas in your interpretation of how English might be. It might be a little frustrating because you may not be able to play with the language in ways that are as familiar and sophisticated to you in your own language. But it can be more practical and more rewarding in the long run. If you have access to somebody with a higher level than your own, maybe you could occasionally ask them to have a look at a few things you have written or help you with some doubts that you might have. You could also imagine yourself in different situations, perhaps work-related or writing to an imaginary friend. Think of who you are writing to and why. Think of what you want from the person reading it and how you could compose it in such a way that promotes it. Grammar and vocabulary are useful, but the effect you have on others, the tone and approach you take, is equally or even more important. You can also really write a friend or somebody, such as in sending messages or emails. Perhaps you are playing an online chess or video game, and there is a section for you to chat in. Chatting with someone is often very good. Many people have the idea that they should only talk with people at their level or higher, but for most, I believe that is very good to communicate with people at all levels. If you are chatting with someone at a much lower level than you, you have to be very selective with the language you use, and this is good practice when you have lower level students and classes. And enjoy the chatting. It doesn't have to be profound or for a long time or incredibly stimulating. It's simply an interaction, and hopefully enjoyable, at least for a short time. You can also chat with others if you join an organization or group. Depending on what you join, some of the language focus might be very specific, but it will likely include some more informal chatting as well. It's a good way to give you more versatility in your speaking and to strengthen your skills as well as learning the language better. If there's an event you like that will be held in English, perhaps in sports or the arts or a concert or a guest lecture or something cultural or something in the neighborhood, then consider getting involved in some way, perhaps as a volunteer. It's a good way of meeting people, finding out new things, and certainly strengthening your English. I have taught English to many English teachers, some from the public school system and others from other areas. I've always admired their drive to better themselves and to improve their understanding of the language. If you decide to take a level test and sign up for an English language course, you will find it interesting and rewarding in many ways. Your confidence and proficiency in the language will increase, and you might get some interesting ideas on how some things can be taught, seeing them from the view of a student. You can also take other kinds of courses where English is spoken but not the focus of study. You could take a course in photography or in dance or in the martial arts, or how to fix your computer, or any kind of course, one that you find interesting. You will learn more specialized vocabulary related to that area and become a better user of English when you interact with the others and explore the theme further. You might even make a friend or two in that course that you're taking. Making friends online or in person is a good way not just to practice your English, but to use it in real ways. Meeting new people could come about from volunteering for events or joining clubs or taking courses. It's not always easy to make friends, but these don't have to be soulmates or someone you feel will become a close and lifelong friend. It could simply be an acquaintance or somebody you make an agreement with to talk to in English for just a short time. It can even be your spouse or an acquaintance who speaks to you in your maternal language normally. Maybe you can agree to speak for 20 minutes before lunch twice a week. Then you can go back to using your normal language with that person. I have some advice for watching videos, movies, and TV series too. Depending on your level and how difficult the accents are, for example, you may wish to watch it in your language first. Then you can watch it again in English with subtitles in your language. If you really like it, you can watch it yet again, but this time with English subtitles, and later without any subtitles. Choose an approach that works for you, and choose something, just like the reading, that interests you in some ways. If your choice is something long, like a movie, then you may prefer to select just one or two scenes to go over again to see more closely how they use the language and to serve as a guide in your understanding and use. I'm going to add one extra possibility here, although many of you probably won't find it suitable to you or your situation. That option is to find a job where you have to use English frequently or all the time. It doesn't have to be related to teaching. Maybe you can take an extended time off from work or your normal routines and find a job as a shop attendant or waiter or whatever. This might appeal more to younger people, but it could be an option for somebody at any age. If this job obliges you to interact with other people in some way, then your English will certainly strengthen, especially in your speaking and listening skills and in building up your vocabulary. Part E. Native or not, teachers will always have a lot to work on, depending on their desire and the circumstances they are in. It should be remembered that one should feel good about what they are doing. It can be difficult at times because we may be feeling a lot of pressure from work or may not be getting along with our colleagues or the administration in the ways that we would like. Still, there are things we can address, especially our skills in being a teacher and our relationships with our students. I've given several suggestions here and in the previous 2 videos on possibly what to improve as a teacher and how you might go about it. These days, I believe it's getting harder to be a teacher, at least for some. On top of all those things to learn to be a teacher, a good teacher, now you must also be open to using and depending on technology and to follow set prescribed systems, rather than following your own common sense and basic instincts. And once you learn those systems, then they will change them to a new set of systems. This new set of challenges might be even more daunting for experienced teachers accustomed to drawing from their working knowledge and skill sets that have proved to be effective in the past. Now they have to learn to do things differently and to follow new systems. Perhaps in the near future, teachers will become and be regarded as technicians, assisting AI rather than AI assisting the teachers. Progress may not always be progress. That is, just because there's a new app out there that everyone is raving about, it may not always be suitable to all students or teachers. But because it is so famous and popular, because it is convenient and ticks a few boxes on somebody's list, it becomes obligatory, and everyone is expected to use it and to be happy about it. Perhaps to include in our list of what it means to be a good teacher, it should be mentioned that a willingness to adapt to the new politics and environments is becoming a greater prerequisite. There is less room for perspectives and opinions different to what is deemed popular and correct at the moment. I'd like to add a few more factors to this list of what we can focus on. They are especially relevant to teachers with not a lot of experience, but even those who have many years sometimes forget a few points or areas. Some have been mentioned earlier, and some are new. So, I'd like to end with a list of what I would consider elements that a good teacher would have in their teaching or might wish to work on further. These aren't in any particular order and should not be considered exhaustive. Just a few points that some would believe to indicate what might make a good teacher. That perception of what it is to be a good teacher could come from the students, or from the administration, or other teachers, or from the teacher him or herself. The teacher cares about the students and wants them to make progress, individually and as a group. This isn't always easily achieved, and many judgment calls are often needed. The teacher is aware of individual differences in her or his students and incorporates measures to reach all of them. This includes placing those ideas into the lesson plan and monitoring the students during the class. Some of those ideas may not work out the way you'd like, but through experimenting, you will get a better feel for how some individuals will react to those ideas. The teacher has direction in the lesson plan and in the execution of it. This direction includes clear presentations of expectations and information to be learned and put into practice. It also includes providing appropriate support and guidelines when needed. It includes anticipation of challenges for the students and how they can deal with them. It includes a building up and also returning to previously presented expectations and background, so students can frequently refer to what is needed and feel more capable in attempting to try it out. That familiarity developed through repetition and frequent practice contributes much to the students' growth. It includes food for thought for homework, for assignments and projects, in testing, in feedback sessions, in notes and other references, in ways of reflecting on how to be more familiar with using the language. The teacher gets the students involved. This means capturing their attention, focusing it in various ways at all points and steps within the lesson, and motivates them to participate actively in the activities and in their learning. This includes active student participation in the presentation of new information, in explanations, in corrections, even in instructions. The teacher gets the students involved. The teacher contextualizes the students' perspectives, helping them identify, define, and clarify where they are in their learning and where to go from there. The teacher understands many of the challenges the students face, including that students learn differently and are in different life situations which can affect their learning. The teacher is prepared to step out of the routine or lesson plan at times to better deal with the situation at hand. The teacher gives the students many opportunities to practice what they are learning, to apply those ideas individually and interacting with other students, sometimes focusing on versatility to help the students better adapt to changing circumstances. The variety of practice opportunities helps reach different students. It can reduce boredom, and it can strengthen their versatility and familiarity when applying what they are learning. Those dynamics can do much in helping the students improve and see what can be done, what needs to be done. The teacher gets students thinking and making decisions on their own. This can include assessing how they feel in today's class or what areas they might want to explore. This also includes asking them leading questions or guiding them so they can discover the language for themselves rather than simply being lectured. The teacher speaks minimally in their instructions, in their explanations. As much as possible, the teacher chooses when and what to say, and how to say it very carefully, according to the level, the makeup of the class, and the objectives she or he has. Also, as much as possible, the teacher, with thought and direction, has the students provide the explanations or search for them, with leading questions or hints, for example. The teacher actively encourages students to explore the language and to see themselves as users of the language. The teacher selects carefully what to teach so that it is realistic and achievable. This includes not overreaching by piling on too much information or to have a lot of useless activities that are more time fillers or only superficially represent what a class might look like. The activities and the directions they take should have direction and meaning, especially to the students. The teacher listens to the students, seeing how they react to a lesson plan as it unfolds and adjust the class along the way to better develop the learning environment. This can also include out-of-class situations, such as how the students respond to homework, projects and tests, or the students' needs out of the class. The teacher doesn't blindly follow one system or a set of routines acquired over time. The teacher treats each class and situation with the class as a new experience, but of course can draw from past experience. The teacher knows that there are lesser developed areas in their teaching and makes realistic decisions on how to deal with them. This can include, by the way, the decision not to work on some areas and accept limitations, at least for the time being. The teacher accepts to some degree that there is injustice in the system, by how one or two key personalities treat others, in many things. You may not be able to change everything, and other people probably have different ideas as to what constitutes a better working environment. However, try to focus on some good elements of your work and situation, such as the students, or the opportunity you have to work on something such as your social skills as they pertain to interacting with the administration. The teacher tries to find things to feel good about their work, and if some things seem possible to improve, then considers whether or not, and possibly how, to explore those areas. This can also mean acknowledging and appreciating that they do some things well, or that they have made noticeable progress in some areas. The teacher knows when to correct, and different ways of doing so to guide and motivate the student as she or he strengthens their understanding and use of the language. Sometimes, other forms of feedback, or even simple interaction and completion of a task, can replace the need for correction. It normally follows that if the teacher treats all the students with respect, the students will treat the teacher and each other with respect. There are many ways to show respect, but I would like to emphasize two approaches that have worked well for me. One is to not only treat the group with respect, but each individual, including when they are struggling or you have to repeat things for them more often. The other students are always watching you, and even though there are some situations where it might be understood why you would lose your patience at times with a challenging student, by showing you're cool, by encouraging ways of approach modeled in your actions, the other students will notice that. Again, there are many ways of showing respect, but I'd like to emphasize a second one, appealing to each student's intelligence as especially appropriate. True, there are some students with more familiarity or talent with the language, but we are all intelligent in many ways. Many students don't like to feel stupid, and it's difficult for them to appreciate that we all have learning curves, and progress can be made, but not necessarily according to their expectations. When you are helping a student with their struggles, still treat them as an intelligent human being. And you have seen many, many other students also struggling in your past experiences. This is giving you a better perspective and understanding, and because of that, you are better able to help them. Help them in ways that recognize that they are intelligent, and you are there to help direct their focus and efforts in ways that can appeal and be effective to their version of intelligence, so they can learn and feel they are learning. This isn't theater. Be sincere about it, always. This contributes immensely, enormously, to a wonderful learning atmosphere, and to all the individuals involved, including yourself. The teacher is aware of pacing, and can play with it, even allow it to take on different forms for different students. This includes putting the students into pairs or small groups, and they can decide on their own pace, one that is suitable for them in their group, and other groups can go at other paces. By controlling their own pace and approach to an activity, they can grow in confidence in making the progress they feel they need, which can definitely include which areas to work on more within the activity. The teacher closes well. This includes starting and ending each activity, closing the class, a theme set for several classes, assigning and later going over the homework, promising to get back to the students about something, and making sure the students understand the instructions or know what directions to take in the activities and in their learning. If something comes up and is left hanging in the air, as much as possible, find a way to resolve it, even if it only means acknowledging that it is there. But at the moment, there are other priorities, and it won't be addressed. Obviously, the list could go on much further, and every teacher or educator would have their own perspectives, adding more weight or less weight to what has been mentioned and including other factors. What is important is that you feel good about yourself and the work that you do at this stage in your career and in future stages. We have looked at different ways one can approach improving one's teaching. If you decide to work on one or more areas, do it in a way that you can enjoy the journey, not just the idealized destination. Try not to be overly critical of perceived elements in yourself or in others. Try to keep everything in a healthy, constructive perspective, including going through a series of bad patches. Feel good when you can. Appreciate those good elements and be selective in contemplating making changes. Obviously, teaching has many aspects involved, and this video has narrowed down its focus to how one might approach working on those elements of their teaching. I hope you have found this useful in some ways, and perhaps as a resource to pass on to another teacher. I would love to hear from you if you have any comments. Thank you. I invite you to have a look at the other videos in this series, and to look at other series such as A Sit Down with Max, which is coming soon. I wish you all the best in your teaching and in your endeavors. Have a good one.